Sure.
Yes.
See me well?
Yes. You're
Yes,
good.
okay. So good afternoon. My name is Alex Bach. I am the co-president of the IE Club of Boston, along with my colleague Arnaud Lucas, who you're going to hear from in a moment. The IE Club has been around for several decades, starting out of Paris, and you'll hear about that later. But the Boston chapter got started almost a decade ago, and we've had a variety of panels over the decade, and had a one-week seminar from people coming around the world to Boston in 2016. And we are looking to sort of, coming out of COVID, rejuvenate ourselves. And those of you who are in the Boston area, we hope we will send you out notes. We have your email now, and we'll send you a note. And we hope that we'll have an in-person meeting later this year and another webinar, and hope you will join us in it. The one comment I would make, and the thing that I think you should think about the IE Club as being important, is that for anyone who's interested in entrepreneurial success, the success of small companies working with large companies is a cornerstone of what the IE Club has done in its chapters around the world, and is something where great connections in those areas, people both large and small companies, in addition to our other partners in universities and government and service providers. But I think the perspective that comes with the IE Club and sort of the value-added piece is there's always in the background thinking about how do large and small companies work together. So with that, let me introduce Arnaud, my co-president. Take it away.
Thank you, Alex. So my name is Arnaud. I'm a co-president as well of the IE Club Boston chapter. And, you know, my pronouns are he, his, I guess. And otherwise, love to have you here. But first, we'd love to introduce our keynote speaker, Beth Wheaton. She actually, you know, I'm super excited because she's currently the e-commerce manager for the North America regional e-commerce team at CMA CGM, which is a big company in the shipping industry. She grew up in a military household and lived actually in Japan for 6 years, you know, learning to love international travel, embracing changes as they come along in life. And, you know, Beth has been actually with the company CMA CGM for over 19 years now, with different roles, and the last 9 years working e-commerce handling functions, you know, testing, analytics, training, getting to know the customers, and supporting customers with their digital journey. And she's here today to talk to us about our experience, especially in e-commerce and with supply chain, which is the topic of today's webinar. So thank you, Beth, and take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure being here today to speak with you guys about the global supply chain and how current events like COVID pandemic have impacted our reality. And also to touch on one of my favorite topics, which is e-commerce and how e-commerce is moving forward into the future using e-solutions to help make things better. Everyone that I know was impacted by COVID-19. In so many ways, everything seemed to change. There was a new normal, I guess you could say, whatever that might be, because that seemed to change regularly too. And I, for one, refuse to kind of accept that chaos is normal. There have to be better days ahead, and that's what we're working towards. Whether you're one of those who worked remotely or were working in the office, struggling to get food and supplies, etc., or working on the front line in the healthcare industry, losing loved ones or friends, or someone like me who was working in the supply chain, trying to keep everything moving so that essential supplies and goods could get where they needed to go as quickly as possible. Regardless of your role, reality changed. Back in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, many assumptions were made about the impact to society and how the world would change. Some emotions I remember feeling were disbelief, uncertainty, speculation, overwhelm, and again, annoyed at people calling things the new normal. I'm sure you can relate, feeling many more emotions as well. We were at the beginning of an unprecedented event, and everything as we knew it was about to change. As a shipping company, we have teams that work to predict changes that are going to occur, what something might impact, where we might need to make changes to kind of counterbalance or minimize the effects of a disruption. In the beginning, overall, the assumption was that the volumes would decrease, and therefore we made plans as a company to reduce capacity to help offset that reduce in the volumes coming in. Keep in mind that we had this pandemic, which is an event like nothing had ever occurred before, affecting so many people at the same time. So there really wasn't a previous experience that we could draw from on this. What ended up happening, and I'm sure you're aware, in the months that followed was we had an increase in consumption, a decrease in supply, and an increase in market price because of the unbalance of the supply and demand in the market. This imbalance continued to further disrupt the supply chain in additional ways. We had what created a complete bottleneck. We had trucker shortages, port congestion, port closures, rail delays, lack of equipment, no containers, no chassis. Supplies weren't getting to where they needed to be to build other parts and cars and electronics and devices. Production stopped. The effects could be felt for a long time. From a shipping side, looking at the vessels sitting out in the port, just waiting to come in and not knowing when that vessel was actually going to unload. This created a problem with schedule reliability. You're not able to predict when something's going to come in if you have no idea when that container will actually offload the vessel. You can't provide reliable information to the customers. Consumers went into panic mode, buying things like toilet paper in mass, stockpiling, causing an even further problem. You couldn't find anything on the shelves in the store. You go to your favorite restaurant and they don't have your favorite food. The impact was felt globally with this pandemic, and it continued to get worse as we went along. When asked how this impacted our reality as a shipping company, I was reminded of a quote that says, "The customer's perception is your reality." Regardless of what our reality became, it was how it impacted the customers that really shaped the reality that we're feeling. Every day working with customers reminded me of this fact. How you handle the changes, how you react, how you manage the customer and manage to get them the information somehow, some way, and keep their trust is key. Take, for example, my favorite topic, which is e-commerce and developing e-solutions. You could spend tons of money developing and improving your website the way you think it needs to be. But if you design something your customers don't need, or worse, develop something that's too complicated for anyone to figure out how to use on their own, it's not going to benefit you in the long run. Also keeping in mind that these solutions will impact those within your company. It's not just about the external customer, but you have internal customers as well, learning to do more with less, learning to streamline processes, getting things to be automated, using artificial intelligence, trying to make things better at all times. For us, we were already working towards having online, easy to use e-solutions that are accessible at all times for customers. Sometimes this type of development involved our own solutions. We were working to do things from the ground up, and other times we employed the help of others and used third-party tools that were already available in the market, tried, true, tested. Customers already knew them, customers liked them and trusted the product. So we were able to implement some of those along the way as well. Before the pandemic hit, we were already on this path towards digitalization in the shipping industry. We were working to find ways to do everything from start to finish, end-to-end shipping solution, all online digitally, to be able to reach more customers globally. COVID-19 acted as an accelerant for us. It created acceptance for things. Like, for example, we at CMA CGM were one of the first carriers to offer a completely paperless original bill of lading via our website. Before COVID-19, this wasn't as accepted globally in some locations. After COVID-19, you found people scrambling to find things that were digital, that reduced a touch point, that didn't involve in-person interactions. that didn't involve somebody being in a physical office, having to print something, having to get something mailed, relying on a broken supply chain to further get bills where they needed to go. So things like that, the digital solutions were made more attractive to customers and promoted more adoption by customers and other countries and governments as well. In this way, it actually helped us further the digital transition that we were already on. The need for additional products to support customers also came about as a result. So many of our customers were working from home and still are working from home. They have limited staff, part of our staff's at home. We have customers who are away from IT support. They're trying out e-solutions for the first time. Maybe they're not sure how to do things. They don't know how to connect a printer. They don't have a printer. They don't have access to tools that they need. This all led to needing to be able to support a customer better as well, and also making sure that the tools and resources being developed were simple for the customers to use. So we also worked on further developing and enhancing our My Customer Service portal, which is rolling out in phases. It's an online tool that customers will be able to use to interact with our agency better, get information and guidance online, find answers to their questions, and also find all sorts of information that they couldn't previously find before. To conclude, our strategy moving forward needs to continue to involve innovation and assessing the situation, developing solutions, reassessing and adapting and evolving these solutions as needed. For us on the shipping company side, our strategies include focusing on long-term contracts and offering dynamic, robust spot rates while possible, looking for ways to harmonize data exchange. This is key. We're working with the DCSA, that's the Digital Container Shipping Association, to standardize the way we exchange data via our APIs as an industry and shipping industry as a whole. There's also an increased demand for data and data models used to forecast and predict supply chain issues and more supply chain management tools. These are things that we are working on adding into our profile as well to diversify and make sure things are all over. We did added air freight to try to get cargo to customers faster as well. In order to do all of this, we need to continue listening to the voice of our customer, both internal and external. By reaching out to customers, been doing surveys, market research, having conversations, and listening to what our customers need. We're also studying our web pages, looking at what customers are using, what they're not using, areas where they may find lag or are stuck. Maybe a customer's stuck in a certain area. We're tracing that information in order to be able to develop better tools, evolve, continue to learn and grow from the experience, and all while constantly striving to do, as we've been saying all year, or the last year or so at CMA, is to find better ways to do things in all aspects of the shipping industry. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's great to see to understand the experience that you lived through, which was kind of under the curtain for many customers. Now, I would like to introduce Sarah, who is actually the founder and CEO of It's Easy, a French startup in food tech. Sarah is based in Paris. Sarah is also the member of the executive committee of the IE Club. And she's more importantly today our moderator for our panel. So Sarah, please take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Arno, for this introduction. I'm very happy to be moderating this second webinar on e-commerce and specifically supply chain challenges. Today, we're very lucky to have expert panelists with us, with whom we will do a deep dive on these subjects. So our first panelist today is Olaf Klogard, Deputy CEO at Sojek Marketing. Sojek specializes in promotional and relational marketing. So for more than 45 years, it has supported consumer brands and retail chains. It helps their customers develop the commitment of shoppers at each stage of the shopping experience. It focuses on small and medium businesses in Europe and acts as a third-party service handling order management, dispatching, and fulfillment. Welcome, Olaf. Happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Richard Weiner, expert trade lawyer at Sidley. Richard has 30 years experience of international trade and has dealt with issues of importance to international firms doing business in the US, but also clients doing business in the EU. He has represented clients in proceedings before institutions such as the World Trade Organization, the US Supreme Court, or the US Department of Commerce. His expertise covers sectors such as steel, paper, chemicals, aircraft engines, electronics, tires, automobiles, and clean technology products. Welcome, happy to have you here, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
So today we're tackling the current state of the global supply chain and its future. Supply chain is a network between a company and its suppliers to produce and distribute a specific product or service. The entities in the supply chain include producers, vendors, warehouses, transportation companies, distribution centers, retailers, and much more. In 2019, we've seen that the global supply chain all over the world has moved more than 19 trillion US dollars in exported goods. But as COVID-driven turmoil extends into its second year now, continued breakdowns in the global supply chain have shown the folly of taking logistics for granted, as Beth has explained to us just earlier. The supply chain can no longer be considered as an afterthought and something that happens in a dark corner. So our first question today for our panelists is, according to you and your experience with your own businesses, how has the pandemic of COVID-19 highlighted the fragility of the global chain? Sorry, Olaf, maybe you could start with your point of view on this.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, just to come back on my company, Sojec Marketing is a subsidiary of La Poste, the French USPS for American fellows. And indeed, we focus on e-commerce logistics and marketing logistics. So, of course, COVID-19 was a deep, as everybody is in any countries, in postal services and in logistics. We've just noticed how these steps, being logistic, being transport, for vendors was key. The impact was huge, of course, with the pandemic. I would say that the specificity for the pandemic is that it happened after a few decades where supply chains are really turned global. I mean, we talk about international trade for decades and decades now, since World War II, I would say. But for maybe the 2-3 past decades, supply chains have really turned global in the sense that interconnections of firms, suppliers, vendors, both for raw materials and finished products, manufactured goods, transport turned into a commodity. So as it was really, really global, not international, but global in the organization of trade between firms. This situation of this initial situation, of course, make the impact of the COVID-19 even deeper. So the second aspect I would say of COVID-19 is that, as you all know, the crisis was global. There were different lockdowns, sometimes at the same times in many countries, sometimes at different waves in different regions of the world. So we could say it's the worst that can happen to a supply chain, because you have some shortage, both globally sometimes, both with big regions of the world in different steps. And affecting everybody globally because of the strong integration of supply chains. So the COVID-19 impact was huge, I would say. And from my experience in e-commerce sites, I was surprised of the fact that even for small businesses, because we focus on e-commerce logistics for small businesses in Sojec, even for them, where you can think that there is more domestic sourcing in terms of supply chains, it was not the case anymore. Even small startups selling some products online to consumers now make them goods manufacturers in China or in Eastern Europe or in North Africa. Same impact. The packaging, they source it in different regions. So even for a small company, the impact was really important. I would say maybe even worse, because for this small company, diversification of supplies was poor. So maybe they had like 1, 2, 3 suppliers for the main goods. So the impact of a shortage of goods from 1, 2 country, 1, 2 suppliers affected dramatically their businesses. So I would say I was really surprised of the impact, but everybody knows the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. No discussion on this, but the overall impact, whatever the economic sector, whatever the size of the company, because now we're really turning to global supply chain, really integrated. So.
Not hear you, Sarah.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was thinking, thank you, Olaf, for sharing those thoughts. I was wondering maybe Beth could share her personal view on this topic.
Sure. For me, it was more, it raised an awareness of how linked we all are. You know, you say the supply chain, when it works perfectly, nobody really notices. They just assume that it's just working. So everything's going, it's smooth. Nobody really knows the work that goes behind it. But you could be producing clothing and maybe the dye comes from an area where we can't get the product out of it. So now you can't have that red shirt that you were trying to sell and promote. So it kind of raised how linked everything was. There's nothing to change that except to diversify and learn how to produce things in other ways, switch to different types of predicting models, start doing some more people using more warehousing. We saw increases in that. We weren't ready for the chaos. We weren't ready for the flooding of fake products. Production was not as good. So you had things that were not up to the standard. You had fewer people working in even harder working conditions. So it just kind of raised all sorts of issues that people normally wouldn't see, and brought to light some things that were already happening, but because you didn't have a gap in the supply versus demand, people weren't noticing that it was out there.
Okay, and do you think the industry was agile enough to be able to move fast and try to find new solutions, whatever it is? It's maybe changing the suppliers or building new warehouses.
I think that we are getting there to where we're agile enough, and we learned a lot to start to adapt to this. The effects are going to be felt for years to come. It's not easy to recover for something that was such a global impact. You've had small, I mean, they're not small, they're big events, but they happen in 1 or 2 places. So it's not the global impact. Something like this just takes a while to get over, and we need more involvement from other parties as well. It's not just one big shipping company and a lot of small customers. It's everybody working together. Everybody needs to collaborate, build better relationships, and also to get that better visibility. And I think we're well on the way towards that with the digital solutions that are out in the market.
Okay.
I think the IMF released a World Economic Outlook last week, which is interesting in this aspect, because they came back to the impact of COVID-19 on supply chain, and the analysis was quite surprising, saying that in the end, supply chains were quite resilient during COVID-19, except maybe for the automotive industry, where there are big shortages and big problems. But for the rest, when you look into, I mean, comparing to the huge pandemic effect, the wage of shortage globally, we were quite resilient, and we were quite resilient because precisely we were diversified. Many industries were diversified in terms of inputs and diversification of supplies. So in the end, the result was not so bad. And of course, I agree with Beth. It was an acceleration in awareness of we should be more agile, we should have more control and visibility on supply chains and more diversification. But still, if it happened, contrary to what some said, if it happened like 3 decades ago, the IMF said they were not sure it would be smoother like this, because diversification was much less important 3 decades ago.
Thank you, Olaf. So yeah, the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen that it's brought it's a huge deal of challenges for the whole industry and the global supply chain. But now more recent events with the war in Ukraine are bringing also very serious matters. And my next question is, what is the impact of the recent Ukraine-related trade and financial sanctions on the global supply chain? Because we've seen that there's already short-term effects that we can notice. And how easy can these be enforced or evaded? So Richard, would you like to weigh in on this?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. I think Beth and Olaf make a very profound initial point, which is that when the supply chain works, people don't really think about it much, that it's invisible to most consumers. But take an event, a superseding event like the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the corresponding sanctions, all of a sudden, the supply chain is very much in evidence. When we as trade lawyers talk about sanctions, we talk about effects on what we think of as four freedoms: the movement of goods, the movement of services, the movement of investments, and the movement of people. And we've seen interruptions in all four as a result of the government policy. In terms of movement of goods, we've seen bars on importation. For example, the US has barred imports of Russian oil. The EU has barred imports of Russian coal. We've seen tariffs raised by the removal of most favored nation status for Russia, so that the tariffs have been raised to exorbitant levels, basically effectively barring importation. We've seen export controls that are of great importance, meaning that technologies, services can't be exported from the EU, the US, the UK, Japan. Instances like the barring of strategic technologies, of semiconductors that Russia needs, of oil exploration equipment that was to be used there. And a great example is barring the export of airplane parts and limiting export licenses for the use of airplanes from Russia into neighboring territories, even those, particularly those, of course, that have not already barred the use of their airspace. We also see limitations on financing, barring many, if not most, export financing and new investments into Russia. And we see limitations on the use of foreign reserves, leading towards at least technical defaults on foreign debt, both corporate debt and government debt. And importantly, from the legal side, we're also seeing the beginning of lawsuits and bilateral investment treaty proceedings for damages against Russia, not only for ruptured contracts, but for the destruction of property, for the theft of intellectual property, and so on. So it's important to see all this for what it is and also for what it isn't, right? We're seeing a huge decoupling of the world economy, measures that are have real bite and will last for a very long time. And I think the Biden administration and our European allies, America's European allies, have begun planning for a very different world in which they no longer try to coexist and cooperate with Russia, but actively seek to isolate and weaken it as a matter of long-term strategy. That's on one side of the ledger. But on the other side, the decoupling or attempts at decoupling is not global. And we see that India, Pakistan, China, the Gulf Arab states, South Africa, and many others are not joining in. At least a half of the world is not aligned with what we think of as the policy of the free world. And So instead of isolating Russia, in a sense, the world economy is cleaved. Take simple examples. The EU has not barred the importation of oil and gas. The US has not barred the importation of fertilizer. The Western countries have not barred Russian banks from the use of SWIFT. If they do, that will literally shut down the economy, but they have not. They've chosen not yet to do that. And but if you step back, and this is where I think it's the most interesting piece of this is, we see that economic interdependency has not deterred Putin, and that I think economic interdependency will not be viewed the same way in the future as it used to be. I mean, economic ties have not been a force for peace, and we who believe in trade expected that it would be. Trade policy, so therefore it's being asked to bear a lot of the weight of international economic policy, and it's not really well designed for that. So how long will these sanctions last? You have to expect them to last a long time, and they're very draconian, both on a primary level and on a secondary level. That's to say, for example, should China try to aid Russian companies in the evasion of Western sanctions? But the impact goes beyond the sanctions themselves, because supply chain decisions, which recently we viewed as based on efficiency and how we could wring costs out of the system, they now have to be considered, those supply chain decisions have to be considered a part of international politics, leading to companies needing to diversify their supply. I think it's fair to say globalization has met its limits, and it's changing, and we can no longer assume that trade will be foundational for peace between trading nations, or even that globalization is good for supply chain resilience. But we used to think about getting the cheapest, easiest, or sometimes greenest sources of supply, and now we have to put a premium on what's safest and what's surest, and sometimes what's closest to home. Of course, there's a counterpoint to all that, right? That the current situation could be short-lived. Look what happened to sanctions on Russia when they invaded Crimea in 2014, that they didn't have much bite. And in practical terms, each of us lives in a country where there are substantial inflationary pressures caused by limitations on imports in large measure. So, we can look, and we look at situations like in the US, the bottlenecks at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. They've been caused mostly by enormous demand for imports. And that's a conspicuous sign that globalization is very much alive. If you look at statistics, global trade in goods and services is on the rise. That's true both in absolute terms and as a percentage of GDP. But the overlapping and it's sometimes competing sanctions, both on a primary and secondary level, have to be viewed as threatening to break the world into competing regional trade blocs.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the most profound impact of these sanctions will be, however long they're in place, vis-a-vis one country or another. So it's a long answer to a simple question. But.
Thank you, Richard. That's very interesting. It's also interesting to know and to have your views. So we can start with you, Olaf, on the concrete impacts. Is there anything that Richard has mentioned that you can see already impacting your business and the area in which you're evolving?
Yeah, I think the Ukrainian war and Russian war is interesting in the sense that it affects specific regions and some specific products. So in that sense, it's closer to events we can forecast in the future that can affect supply chain in the future, because COVID-19 global pandemic, I hope, will not be like every couple of years. So I think this case the Russian-Ukrainian case is a shock to supply chain as well, but it's more specific to certain regions and products. So I think it would be, and being the direct effect or being the sanctions or the bar on certain products, as Richard said, but still it's more constrained on a specific sector. So probably it would be this kind of shock we have to know in the future, because of a climatic event in some regions of the world, because of the cyber attack in some regions of the world. So I think global supply chain in the future may be affected by this kind of events. I hope not so many war, but in terms of scope, probably these kind of events. So the effect were in some ways for some products similar to COVID-19, shortage of products, supply chains, transport costs, but overall in Europe at least, the indirect effect are the most powerful. Indirect effect being energy costs, and then transport costs, logistics, employees, inflation rates, wages, everything.
Yeah,
we're much more affected by indirect effect of the crisis in Europe than direct effect, I would say.
okay, very clear. Beth, and overseas, do you see any direct or indirect impact of this event?
It does impact the supply chain to some extent. For what we do here in the US, it's not as much of an impact on us. Our customers aren't feeling the effects, so I can't speak too much on that point. Okay, fair. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on these very crucial topics. Insufficient inputs have been a concern since the pandemic began, due to an abrupt rise in consumer demand also, like never before. But there are other concerns, such as you've mentioned it, increasing freight prices, difficult demand forecasting, changing consumer attitudes, also digital transformation. All of these changes lead us to our second major topic for this webinar, which is the future of the global supply chain and beyond. And my next question is, how can a company build a robust global supply chain? Sorry. So my question goes to Olaf, please.
Yeah, I think, well, indirectly we've addressed the issue, but what we've learned with this crisis is that you see supply chains when there are problems. So Beth said really correctly. So when supply chains are unstable because of crisis, you find uncertainty. So I think future supply chain to cope with this uncertainty will have to deal with different issues. The first is probably to be more agile. When I see my customer in the e-commerce industry, they wanted to have more orders, more frequent orders, smallest supplies, and more frequent supplies. So you have to be more agile. They want to have real-time information on their stock management, on their order management. They need the technology to monitor all this supply chain much more accurately because it's unstable. So they want more visibility, more control, and more agility on this stock management, order management, supply chain. So I think this is one of the main effects. And as Beth said, I mean, it existed before, but still it's accelerated this demand from customer to really control the supply chain, because uncertainty provides this necessity for visibility and control. So I think it would be the key consequence for building a supply chain in the future. It's to provide the tool and the right processes to allow our customer to control these supply chains.
Thank you, Olaf. Makes a lot of sense. Beth, do you concur? Do you have maybe something to add on how to make it more robust?
No, I definitely agree. Digital is here. the tools that are out there, the sharing of data, the access to using that data, and finding ways to kind of harness the power of what's available in the market already out there, and standardizing things is the future. It's definitely the way forward, and will really help people to diversify what they're doing. Also, additional partnerships and finding ways to get, being innovative. It gives people a chance to really explore what else is available and what else they can possibly do.
Yes, totally agree. Innovation will play a great part in partnerships also. Richard, would you have any advice from a trade lawyer perspective to how to make it stronger?
So the most important thing is to have diversity of approach, diversity of supply, diversity of avenues to fulfill whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. The rules are changing, they're changing fast. And given the time lag, it's always very hard to change whatever your approach has been. But I think we have not seen the last sets of sanctions. We have not seen the last attempts to evade sanctions, and therefore countermeasures by governments. Things could get a lot more dramatic. But so having a diversity of approach, I think, is essential to trying to achieve your objectives, and particularly so these days. So that's what I would emphasize.
Thank you, Richard. So we have about 15 minutes left, and one last question that we would like to tackle, and it's related to the environment. We know that supply chain is sadly responsible for a lot of greenhouse emissions, and also with the climate change, we're going to have extreme weather conditions that will be also impacting and sometimes breaking the supply chain integrity. So is there any way we could limit the impact on ecology? Alex, maybe you could.
Sure. Let me start. I've been in the clean energy business the last 10 years and lithium ion business. I think that before the crisis, there were lots of people were trying to use ecology impact, climate change impact as a differentiator. The customers cared about those issues, asked about them, or some of their customers cared about them and asked about them. And there is the whole ESG area, environmental, social, and corporate governance goals. I would say one of the things that remains and is important for this whole area, but I think even more we're going to see, is those things only matter if the measurements are real, if there are real metrics with verifications that people trust. And I think we're going to see an increasing push on that as people try and separate themselves. People are going to say, well, that they're not really doing it, or how are they doing it? But with the global supply chain changing and the way we talked about here, with if you go from the tradition of just-in-time inventory, and but with, as Beth discussed and everyone's discussed, the uncertainties and delays and supply chain, the need for backups and alternative supplies, that's all going to drive up costs. And so that the price pressures are certainly going to have an impact on consumers, how they view things. And that's going to be a significant pressure, I think, on how people, what they talk about in terms of climate change or their ecology impact. You look at the people, there's a big national world effort to try and promote the electric vehicle market as a market. And at the same time, and part of that thought is increasing the prices of fossil fuels. But here we have national governments right now trying to decrease fossil fuel prices so that their national consumers in a short term aren't as impacted by the price increases. And so this whiplash, I think, is going to be very important. Just one example is in the lithium ion world, battery world, people are very pressured around certifications that the raw materials are being mined in ways that are ecologically safe and labor safe and not using child labor. And there's a whole burgeoning industry of verifications on that, and what somebody says they're not using that, how do you know if it's actually happening? So I think the larger message is, I think we're going to see the pressures of inflation, but with the inexorable view that a significant part of the public believes, as I do, that climate change is an existential issue, And so people being able to market that they're having a less negative or a positive impact, I think is going to remain. And I think as a result of that, I think you're going to see pressure for how people monitor and verify those issues. So that's one component. But
thank you, Alex. Yeah, so clearly the supply chain is having tremendous impact, and I'm sure that all the companies that are depending on or actually performing in supply chain management are going to have a lot of challenges trying to cope with the weather conditions or trying to make it more eco-friendly. Have you started anything? Do you have any current concerns regarding how to make it happen, Beth?
So on our side for CMA-CGM, we've always been looking for ways to improve how we're impacting the environment. I know in 2020, we reduced our CO2 emissions by 4%. Which may not seem like a lot, but that was on a top of a previous reduction of 6%. We are looking to be completely carbon neutral by 2050. And taking other measures, last year in 2021, we planted trees to help with reforestation and enhancing the environment. It was 110,000 trees, one for every employee that the company has. Taking measures on, we just celebrated Earth Day, so we just did some beautification and work on our office space and doing some planting of plants there to help the environment in that area. Looking at things like LNG, the liquid natural gas, and also doing some biofuel, which was 20% of recycled vegetable oil and forest waste from 2019 onwards. We did a reef recovery project and are doing some biomethane as well to reduce our carbon footprint on the shipping industry. We do take the environment very serious, and we're constantly looking at better, like I said, better ways to manage the planet. It's important.
It is amazing that you're doing all this. Olaf, on your side with Sojek, or is there anything also that you could see maybe with the SMBs that you're working with?
Yeah, providing the logistics and the transport for this e-commerce company, of course, we try to get the greenest possible. So, you know, La Poste or the French Post is now the more, we compensate 100% of the gas emission of our vehicles, and we are, I think, the first in a private property of vehicles. We're the first in the world. I think we're like 20,000 vehicles being only electric vehicles. So we try to support, as everybody, as every company, CSR objectives in this aspect. But when we look at our customers, clearly the balance is difficulty between having this diversification of supplies of inputs that implies going elsewhere to protect the supply chain, and the environmental issue where, of course, the best plan would be to have suppliers in a short distance from your company, but in some cases it's not the more resilient supply chains. For example, I remember the example of Toyota company in Japan after the earthquake of Onoku, I think, 5 years ago. There was a plan to diversify supplies after the earthquake, because precisely they had been working for years to find local suppliers, which is a good thing for the environment. But when you have an event on this region, you're blocked. So there is clearly a balance between objectives. That's part of one of the difficulties of the environmental issue.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, guys, for answering all of these questions. We have a couple of minutes left. If anyone wants to add in something, feel free. Otherwise, I will hand it over to Maurice, who's going to say a few words for the conclusion.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all for either participating or listening. As one of the founders of the IE Club, I'm very proud of our continued strive to work in the ecosystem of SMEs. As Alex mentioned it in the beginning, along with Arnaud, started about 20 years ago this journey at the IE Club with a very simple idea, and the idea is to bring context to help the entrepreneur, the SME, because when you create a company and when you are in the first years of creating your company, it's always very important to find the good connections, relationships, and overall advice from either people who have done it before or from large companies who may be good partners in the field a company is in. So this is the second event organized by the IE Club Boston chapter on the topic of e-commerce. This event today was on the global supply chain, COVID, and the future of e-commerce. Very timely in terms of the different perspectives brought in. If I may just bring in a few of the key points, I will start with Beth, who reminded us that the perception of the client is really our reality. Doesn't matter what we think, but the client has a perception, and I think it's key in the business we're in, how we are perceived. Richard brought in the impact of the sanctions, of the policies, of the long-term effect. This is probably not going away in the few weeks. Well, we hope so, but it's going to last. It's going to have a strong impact on how we do things. We're feeling it, I think, all over the world, and to discuss it and to go with and to review what is being done is very important wherever we are on this e-commerce, logistics, on the whole chain. Olaf reiterated the importance of strong integration, between the e-commerce partners, because the experience in e-commerce is really relies on the successful integration of a number of different actions, and the more integrated they are, for example, with the logistics partners, the better the experience, and the more likely it is that the customer will come back and reorder whatever he needs. So having said that, and maybe also thanking again Sarah Lasvar, founder of It's Easy, and again Alex Bach, co-president of the IE Club in Boston, and along with his remarks on the importance of reducing the footprint in general with specific actions, because I think that this is a very timely topic of ours. So having maybe reiterated some of the key points, I would like just maybe to mention a few things or a couple of things on the IE Club. One, the IE Club is the IE Club is a community of entrepreneurs, large corporates, investors, professional services, and public sector. So these 5 communities work hand in hand. They work hand in hand globally. So we have at the IE Club chapters in Boston, in Montreal, in Tel Aviv, in Beirut, in Abu Dhabi, and of course in Paris, which is where the IE Club was launched. And we do that by having global events webinars such as the one we attended to this afternoon or noontime, depending where we are, and other events. And if I may maybe remind or suggest if you events that will be coming. We shall be hosting in June with some partners of ours an event on global innovation and entrepreneurship. And the idea is to say that no matter how big or small a company, we believe that the company should be thought of in a global way so that once it gets a little bit bigger, it has the genes to expand globally, because this is how companies become successful these days, by being ready from day one to go global. So we have our event in June, the Global Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And if I may, I would like to ask each one of you to share with us, with Laura, companies that you think may be interesting for us to invite, because we are conducting a jury, and from the different companies that participate, we shall be nominating the 60 companies that are our GIEs. So in 3 different fields, in the field of internet, technology, and clean tech. And maybe two other events. One, I'm not sure what the topic is yet, but I'm sure it will be the next webinar organized by the Boston chapter. Arnaud and Alex, any idea what the next topic is, or do you need?
I think we will. I think we're gonna, again, that deserves some careful thought, and I think we will circulate to both LinkedIn and other places, and to the folks who are on the list for today, advance notice. But I think your point, I would just emphasize, people in the totality of events you do get a lot of discussion around how to actually make things work and how the world really works. And it's a great investment of, concentrated time to come to our events, and we hope people will do more of that, and we'll send out information about that.
Okay, great. And if you are participating, if you're listening to us, if you are in the discussion chain, if you have ideas you would like to share with us, please do. We're always happy to listen from you and to take your feedback, so our content is as close to the need of the participants. And then last but not least, we shall have our clean tech event in its ninth year, and year after year we go about we take a topic in the clean tech industry and we tackle it. It can be mobile agility, it could be clean energy, it could be a variety of different things, and we try to take a tack on it. And this would be the clean tech would be in September. I think we are getting now to the end of our 1 hour. Maybe we're 2 minutes late. Apologies. It was great to have this webinar, and we look forward to others. And thank you all for the participation, because the energy is always the sum of our energies, and it's very refreshing to discuss it in a different modes and shapes. Maybe Arnaud, Alex, if you want to, maybe.
No, I think you've done a good job, Arnaud. Go ahead if you want to close us out.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for all the panelists and the speakers today. Thank you. I learned a lot. So, and hope that we can do it again soon.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.